The air of Provence smells of dry herbs and warm stone. The sun has hidden behind the Alpiles, and the silence seems to spread like a blue sheet. Only the murmur of crickets remains, and the faint whisper of a breeze that disorders the cypresses. We are in the south of France, in a small town called Saint-Rémy de Provence. It is the year 1889, and a man with a restless gaze, reddish hair, and paint-stained hands watches the world from the narrow window of a white room. His name is Vincent van Gogh, and tonight, one of many nights of his voluntary seclusion, he is about to transform the darkness into a symphony of light. From here, our journey begins. It will not be an art lesson, nor a simple biography. It will be a nocturnal crossing through mind, emotion, and color. We will travel together through the corridors of time, breathing the air of Saint-Rémy, discovering the days and nights that gave rise to one of the most moving and universal works ever painted, the Starry Night. Before we continue, I'm very curious to know from where in the world and at what time you're joining tonight. I'd love to read you in the comments. Imagine walking with us along a cobbled path that leads to an ancient monastery of gray stone. With each step, the ground crunches beneath your feet, and the air grows cooler, quieter. In the distance, among tall cypresses, rises a sober building, with a tower that watches over the valley. That place is the asylum of Saint Paul de Mossol, an old convent where the monks were replaced by souls in search of calm. Among them, Vincent's. He was admitted there after one of his most intense crises in Arles, the same that led him to cut off part of his ear. It was not a prison, but a withdrawal, a refuge to recompose his mind and, above all, to keep painting. Within those thick, cold walls, time passes with an almost sacred slowness. The patients stroll through the cloister. Some murmur, others pray. The bells mark the hours without haste, and the carers move in silence. In a small room on the second floor, light enters filtered through a barred window. That is Van Gogh's cell. From there you can glimpse a strip of sky, a distant hill, and a field that stretches to the horizon. It doesn't seem like much, but for him, it is an entire universe. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Vincent wakes with his heart alight. He sits on the bed, takes a sheet of paper, and begins to write to his brother Theo, the only one with whom he can share his thoughts without fear. In those letters he speaks of the colors he sees even in the dark, of the shapes that dance in his mind, of the mystery of the night. Often, he writes, it seems to me that the stars are points where eternity touches the earth. That phrase, simple and luminous, sums up his gaze, a mixture of science, mysticism, and pure emotion. Outside, the night grows denser. The firmament over Saint-Rémy is sprinkled with stars that seem to move, to throb. It is not just any night. It is a living night, full of energy. While most sleep, Van Gogh contemplates, absorbs, imagines. What for others is a dark sky, for him is a map of spirals and invisible currents. That vision is not only an aesthetic experience, it is a form of solace. In that sky, the painter finds something earthly life denies him: order, harmony, meaning. Nocturnal Provence has its own music. The crickets intone a continuous, almost hypnotic chant. On the horizon, the cypresses seem like columns that hold up the sky. A dog barks in the distance. The wind comes down from the mountains with the scent of lavender. That entire world breathes to the same rhythm, and amid that breathing, a man with a wounded soul begins to dream in color. If you close your eyes, perhaps you can see it too. The brushstrokes do not yet exist, but they already spin in his mind like whirlwinds of blue and yellow light. Vincent does not seek to copy reality. He seeks to translate it. His painting is not a window, but a door to the invisible. Each stroke is a word in a language only he seems to understand. And yet, that language, made of pigment and feeling, is so universal that more than a century later it still speaks to us without need of translation. During the day, in the gardens of the asylum, he paints irises, olive groves, wheat fields. But at night, the sky becomes his greatest obsession. From his window, he watches the moon advance over Mount Gaussier and the small sleeping town at its feet. The lights of the houses flicker like earthly stars. That dialogue between sky and earth moves him deeply. Sometimes he writes that he would like to die in a wheat field under such a sky, immense, breathing above him. In the asylum, Van Gogh is far from the bustle of Paris, from quarrels with other painters, from rejections and judgments. He is alone, but in that solitude something new blossoms. The forced calm of the monastery compels him to look inward, and from that silence springs a purer, more essential vision. The pain will pass, he tells Theo, but art will remain. Those words, so simple, sound today like a promise fulfilled. As night falls, the tones change. Deep blue mixes with flashes of cobalt. Black softens into violet shades. Van Gogh observes the movements of the sky with an intensity bordering on devotion. Each star is for him a vibration of the spirit, each cloud an invisible current. He does not see chaos, but energy. And that energy, transformed into paint, will become the very substance of the Starry Night. If we think for a moment about the world of 1889, we understand the solitude of his gaze. Europe moves toward modernity. Science discovers new laws of the cosmos. Telescopes explore the firmament with mathematical precision. But Van Gogh, with neither formulas nor calculations, manages to intuit what astronomers are only beginning to describe: the perpetual motion of matter, the turbulent dance of celestial fluids. His artistic intuition anticipates physics, as if his sensitivity were tuned to the very pulse of the universe. In the silence of the asylum, surrounded by walls and memories, Vincent paints to survive. Not for recognition, nor for money, nor even for history. He paints because he needs to, because painting is his way of breathing. And while the world sleeps, he continues, night after night, seeking the exact form of emotion, the stroke that can contain the infinite. Saint-Rémy sleeps. The stars twinkle over the hills. In a solitary room, a man contemplates the sky and, without knowing it, is leaving a luminous trace that will cross the centuries. In that suspended instant, time stops. Only the murmur of the wind remains, and the certainty that something unrepeatable is about to be born. While dawn peeks between the cypresses, the bells of the monastery announce a new day. Within those walls, the refuge where Van Gogh seeks calm begins to reveal its deepest secret. Dawn arrives slowly over Saint-Rémy, like a caress that awakens the fields. The mist dissolves among the cypresses, and the first rays of sun illuminate the old monastery of Saint-Paul-de-Moselle. Its gray stone walls absorb the light with an almost human serenity, as if they kept within them secrets they do not wish to reveal immediately. Inside, silence rules the corridors, a thick silence, yet full of life, where every sound, the swish of a broom, the distant echo of a step, the murmur of the wind, becomes part of a music only the soul seems to hear. The asylum of St. Paul is a secluded place, surrounded by hills and wheat fields. In the 11th century it was a monastery, and it still preserves the Romanesque structure. A central cloister with a small garden, stone arches, and narrow corridors where light enters in fragments. In 1889, the building had been converted into a sanatorium for the mentally ill, attended by Augustinian monks and doctors who tried to balance reason and compassion. Van Gogh arrived there in May of that year, after a tumultuous winter in Arles, marked by the break with Gauguin, the self-mutilation, and the growing fear of losing control of his mind. From the first day, Saint Paul became for him a kind of ambiguous refuge. On one hand, a place of confinement and isolation. On the other, a sanctuary where pain could be transformed into creation. His room was small, with an iron bed, a wooden chair, and a barred window facing east. But for Van Gogh, that window was more than a patch of sky. It was a border between his inner world and the vast universe waiting outside. Often, the inmates of the asylum were confined to strict routines: meals in silence, supervised walks, simple therapies. But Vincent was granted a certain freedom, thanks to the respect that Dr. Perron, the director of the hospital, felt for his talent. He allowed him to set up his easel in an adjoining room, which became his improvised studio. There he painted every day, sometimes from dawn to dusk, almost as if painting were a form of prayer. His life in Saint Paul was marked by a delicate balance. There were days of serenity, when he walked among the olive trees and sketched the garden's flowers. But there were also days of darkness, when his mind was agitated and he had to remain in bed, under watch. Even so, even in his most fragile moments, the need to create did not abandon him. When he could not go out to paint, he wrote. When he could not write, he observed. And when not even that was possible, he imagined colors inside his head, recalling the intense yellow of the sunflowers, the infinite blue of the hourless sky. The landscape surrounding the asylum was an extension of his soul. To the north, the Alpiles rose like a wall of violet stone. To the south, the fields undulated under the wind, dotted with poppies and irises. The light of Provence, changing and alive, seemed made for him. A light that does not merely illuminate, but breathes, caresses, converses with the shadows. On his walks along the monastery paths, Van Gogh found comfort in the smallest details. A twisted branch, the sun's reflection in a water jug, the shadow of clouds moving over the fields. He noted all this in his mind, to later turn it into paint. It was not the first time he found relief in nature, but here in Saint-Rémy, the relationship became almost spiritual. The earth, the trees, and the wind became his medicine. While other patients relied on tonics or rudimentary treatments, he turned to color. Painting was a way to stabilize his mind, to order the inner chaos. In art, he wrote to Theo, I find something stronger than illness. And though his body was in a hospital, his spirit was in the fields, following the light of day. Saint Paul was also a place of contrasts. On one hand, the monk's routine, prayers, communal meals. On the other, the cries of some patients, sudden crises, nocturnal murmurs. Amid all this, Van Gogh remained serene, observant. He did not fear others' madness because he recognized it. He said he saw in those men something of himself, as if each one reflected a fragment of his own imbalance. Perhaps that is why he never judged them, but portrayed them with tenderness when he could. In his letters, Van Gogh describes the asylum as a place of peace wrapped in melancholy. He speaks of the scent of lavender, the sound of cicadas, the color of the mountains at dusk. And although he sometimes confesses to feeling trapped, he also admits that there he can concentrate, work without interruptions, and find a different beauty in solitude. Here, I feel less disturbed, he tells Theo, because everything is so quiet that the soul calms. That calm, however, was not synonymous with happiness. It was rather a truce, a pause between storms. There were days when depression sank him, and the voices of the past returned to visit him. But it was enough to look at the sky or the garden for something within him to ignite again. In those moments, his painting became more intense, more alive. The twisted cypresses, the irises that open like flames, the clouds that spin in spirals. Everything seemed to pulse to the rhythm of his breathing. The monks of the asylum watched him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Some considered him a genius, others a lost soul. He, for his part, hardly spoke. He worked in silence, with quick, precise movements. Few could imagine that amid that isolation, one of the most fruitful stages of his artistic life was being born. In barely a year, Van Gogh painted more than 150 canvases, among them works now considered absolute jewels: irises, the sower, wheat field with cypresses. Painting became his way of communicating with the world. While others kept diaries or wrote letters, he did so with the brush. Each stroke was a confession, a prayer, a question. His colors were not mere pigments. They were pure emotions. Deep blue was his sadness, yellow, his hope, green, his need for balance. In his studio at the asylum, those colors mixed again and again, seeking a harmony he perhaps did not find in life. Sometimes he went out to paint in the garden, where the olive trees swayed slowly in the wind. Their twisted branches seemed to speak to him, as if they shared the same fate: to resist, to bend without breaking. In those contorted forms he saw the beauty of the imperfect, the dignity of pain. What others saw as deformed trees, he saw as living beings full of movement. Each brushstroke on the canvas was a breath shared between the artist and nature. In one of his letters, Van Gogh wrote, "The sadness will last forever, but so will the beauty." That phrase, born perhaps in some corner of St. Paul, sums up his philosophy in those months of confinement. He knew he could not escape himself, but he also understood that he could turn his suffering into color, his melancholy into light. The days passed between painting and silence, between hope and relapse. But something was changing inside him. The refuge among the olive trees, with its apparent calm and immense sky, was giving him a new way of looking. It was not peace he had found, but a fragile equilibrium, enough to keep creating. And from that balance would soon be born a bolder, more cosmic vision, where the sky itself would become the protagonist. Outside, the afternoon falls again over Saint-Rémy. The wind moves the cypresses, the bells resound in the distance. Van Gogh puts away his brushes, closes the door of his small studio, and before sleeping, looks once more out the window. The sky shines with thousands of points of light, and he feels that those stars watch him, patient, awaiting the moment when his hand will turn them into paint. And so, between the murmur of the wind and the glow of the night, the vision of something greater begins to form in his mind. Something that has no name yet, but that will soon forever transform the way the world looks at the sky. There are nights that seem to contain all the mystery of the universe. In Saint-Rémy, the June sky of 1889 is an ocean of deep blue that beats over the sleeping earth. From his room in the asylum, Vincent van Gogh contemplates that sky through the bars of his window. The night breeze moves the cypress branches, and the song of the crickets blends with the soft tolling of a bell. The entire monastery sleeps, but he cannot. Something keeps him awake, a force that does not spring from insomnia, nor from unease, but from an irresistible need to look outward, and inward as well. Before him, the night is not just darkness. It is a spectacle in motion. The stars seem to turn, to flare and fade with an almost musical rhythm. The moon, enormous and luminous, hangs over the horizon like a lamp that pours liquid gold over the Alpilles. In the distance, the little town of Saint-Rémy rests under a mantle of stillness, barely interrupted by the scattered lights of a few houses. But in Van Gogh's gaze, nothing is still. Everything vibrates, everything breathes. The sky becomes a living organism, an infinite current that pulses over the world. In his sketchbook, the artist begins to trace quick, almost feverish lines. he does not seek to copy what he sees, but what he feels. That is his essential difference from the realism of the time. Van Gogh paints the emotion of the landscape, not its appearance. The stars he draws are not fixed points, but spirals of energy. The sky is not an immobile ceiling, but a river in constant movement. It is as if the entire universe were burning, and he, from his small window, could hear the sound of the celestial fire. In one of his letters to Theo, written shortly after, he will confess that his goal is not to paint an exact firmament, but a night that makes one think of the infinite. And that is precisely what he is trying to capture in those moments. The feeling of immensity, the connection between the human soul and the cosmos. At bottom, Van Gogh does not paint stars. He paints the experience of contemplating them. If we close our eyes and imagine his room, the scene becomes almost palpable. The cold stone floor, the smell of turpentine and oil, the distant murmur of the wind entering through the window. Moonlight slips through the bars and settles on the table where the brushes rest. Vincent, eyes fixed on the horizon, breathes slowly, as if he feared breaking the balance of that nocturnal calm. Outside, the universe keeps turning, indifferent and majestic. Inside, a man seeks to translate its immensity into a language of colors. That window becomes his emotional telescope. He does not need to look with astronomical precision. His sensitivity suffices to intuit the movement of the heavenly bodies. Curiously, modern studies have shown that the spirals of the Starry Night reproduce with striking accuracy patterns of turbulence that appear in fluids and in astronomical images of galaxies. But Van Gogh knew nothing of physics. His observation was purely intuitive, guided by emotion and memory. What science would confirm a century later, he had felt in the flesh. In those days, his mind is in a kind of borderland, between calm and agitation, between reality and vision. The episodes of crisis still visit him, but amid them arise flashes of extraordinary lucidity. Painting becomes his way of anchoring himself to the world, of transforming the inner storm into visible beauty. Sometimes, he writes to his brother, my madness is only the need to look too intensely. Each night when the moon appears over the hills, Van Gogh sits before his window. He no longer only observes, he listens. The sky has a sound, a deep murmur, like a river of light. The stars speak to him in a language that needs no words. In his imagination, colors blend. The cobalt blue of the firmament, the bright yellow of the stars, the greenish black of the cypresses. Everything moves in a silent dance, a cosmic choreography that only he seems to perceive. Little by little, his gaze transforms the real landscape into an inner stage. The town he sees in the distance is not Saint-Rémy as such, but a symbol of the human world. Fragile, small, asleep under immensity. The cypress that rises in the foreground is not a simple tree, but a bridge between earth and sky, a flame that connects the finite with the eternal. And the stars are burning eyes, presences that watch and accompany. In his painting, nothing is still because nothing in nature is. The window becomes then both border and mirror. Through it, Vincent looks at the cosmos, but in doing so, he contemplates himself. The outer night reflects his own mind, full of eddies, sudden lights, deep shadows. His painting ceases to be a description to become a confession. It is his way of saying, "This is me. This is how my soul moves when I look at the world." In the days that follow, when the sun allows, he goes out into the garden and takes quick notes of the landscape. He observes the movement of clouds, the gleam of stars in the pond's water, the silhouette of cypresses cut against the dawn. All that feeds the image maturing within him. He does not need to copy the sky exactly the same each night. What he seeks is to capture its spirit. In the studio before the canvas, he lets memory and emotion take control. The brushstrokes spin, cross, throb. Each stroke seems like an impulse of the heart. And so, between the silence of the asylum and the vastness of the firmament, one of the most iconic works of universal art begins to take shape. The Starry Night does not arise from a fit of madness, as many believe, but from a moment of deep contemplation. It is the result of months of looking at the sky, of feeling it, of breathing it. It is not an improvised painting, but the fruit of a silent meditation. On the canvas, the movement is total. The stars whirl in eddies. The moon shines with an almost mystical intensity. The sky seems to expand like a tide of energy. But at the base, the town sleeps peacefully, immobile. It is the contrast between earthly calm and cosmic agitation, between the human and the divine. That tension, that fragile balance between order and chaos, is what makes the painting something universal. If we think about it, Van Gogh's window opened not only onto the landscape of Saint-Rémy, but onto the soul of modern man. Through it, the artist taught us to look at the night with different eyes, not as an empty space, but as a territory of emotion and movement. Each star he painted is a heartbeat, each spiral a breath. And at bottom, each brushstroke is an attempt to answer a question we have all asked ourselves at some point. What place do we occupy in this immense universe that turns above us? Perhaps that is why, when one looks at the Starry Night, one feels that the painting breathes. It is not a static image, but a living experience. It is the materialization of a gaze that refuses to merely see and seeks to understand. Van Gogh did not want to imitate the world. He wanted to participate in it, to be part of its movement. Painting was his way of joining the pulse of the cosmos. In those silent nights of Saint-Rémy, when the moon bathed the hills and the air smelled of lavender, Van Gogh found more than inspiration. He found a way to reconcile his fragility with immensity. From that small window, he managed to look farther than anyone. Outside, the sky keeps turning. Inside, the artist closes his eyes for an instant and lets the image imprint itself on his mind. He knows he will soon carry it to the canvas, and that in those spirals of light, he will imprint not only a landscape, but a vision. The night sky breathes over Saint-Rémy, and in Van Gogh's mind, the symphony of colors that will transform the night into eternity is already beginning to form. In the improvised studio of the asylum, the light enters through the window like a blessing. It rests on the rough walls, slips across the table where the brushes wait, and kindles the glass jars full of pigments. Each jar contains a promise: the ultramarine that smells of sky, the chrome yellow that shines like liquid fire, the white that resembles silence. Van Gogh leans over the canvas with his face lit by that glow and begins to mix colors as if composing a melody. His palette is not an instrument of precision, but an extension of his soul. What other artists ponder with reason, he feels with his whole body. Painting, for Vincent, is not just a technique. It is a secret language, a way of saying what words cannot reach. Each color has an emotion, each combination a spiritual temperature. Yellow, for him, is hope, joy, but also fragility. Blue is calm and depth, though sometimes tinged with melancholy. Green is the bridge between them, life that pushes through, the harmony between reason and impulse. In his letters to Theo, color becomes a confessed obsession. Art is not in copying nature, he writes, but in expressing it with the soul, in finding the tone that corresponds to our inner feeling. That way of thinking sets him apart from the canons of academic painting, which still dominated the exhibitions of Paris. While critics sought perfect realism or measured brushwork, Van Gogh pursued another truth, emotional truth. His canvases did not aim to reproduce the world. but to translate it. Each stroke was a word, each layer of paint a sentence, and the entire canvas a visual poem. He did not paint to please, he painted to understand. In Saint-Rémy, that quest grew more intense. The solitude of the asylum and the nearness of nature drove him to explore a more vibrant palette. In his first months there, the soft tones of Arles transform into bold contrasts. The deep blue of the night against the incandescent yellow of the stars, the dark green of the cypresses alongside the pale gold of the moon. There is no academic balance in those compositions, but an inner energy that seems to move like wind through branches. If we look closely at his brushstrokes, we discover they are not random gestures. Van Gogh applied paint with controlled force, repeating circular movements that gave the painting a rhythm, a breathing. His strokes are short, dense, almost tactile. They overlap one another, creating a living texture that seems to throb. Sometimes the oil accumulates so much that the relief casts shadows. That thick matter is his way of making the invisible visible, the pulse of emotion. In the Starry Night, for example, the sky is not painted with a uniform blue, but with a symphony of tones that merge and clash. Cobalt, ultramarine, indigo, turquoise. Among them, the whirlwinds of yellow light vibrate like flames. The combination follows no natural logic, yet it conveys a deeper truth than reality itself. It is color in the service of feeling, matter turned into emotion. Van Gogh understood that color had psychological power. He knew it could awaken sensations, even in those who did not understand art. In one of his most beautiful letters, he writes, "I try to express with color the love of life. I want my paintings to make one feel what words cannot say." That conviction led him to experiment without fear, mixing tones that in his time were considered dissonant. Where others saw conflict, he saw harmony. Where the common eye saw excess, he saw intensity. That visceral relationship with color did not arise from madness, as has so often been said, but from extreme sensitivity. Van Gogh was a man who felt the world with uncommon intensity. Colors for him were sounds, lights, melodies. In his mind, each hue had an emotional echo. That is why his works seem to have rhythm, as if composed to be heard as much as seen. Let us imagine Van Gogh at work for a moment. He rises early, when the sun barely touches the hills. He prepares his pigments, mixing them with linseed oil and turpentine. The smells blend, the sweetness of the oil, the roughness of the wet paint. With the first brushstroke, the canvas ceases to be an empty surface and becomes living territory. Lines spin, curves tangle, colors clash. His hand moves fast, almost urgently, as if he feared the vision would dissolve before completion. Each stroke is born of the heart, not calculation. There is no distance between the artist and his work. What he feels becomes color instantly. If the soul is agitated, blue turns violent. If it finds calm, yellow opens like a flower. It is a process as physical as it is spiritual, a constant dialogue between body and emotion. As the painting advances, his breathing changes, his pulse quickens. At times he stops, contemplates what he has done, and smiles faintly, as if he had managed to trap a fragment of the world only he can see. In Saint-Rémy, his palette expands with unprecedented freedom. He paints the irises with violets that brush mystery, the fields with impossible greens, the olive trees with grays that seem blue at dusk. Each painting is a new exploration of chromatic language. But the Starry Night will be the culmination of that quest. In it, color not only describes the scene, but transforms it into experience. The stars, the clouds, the town. Everything is bound by an invisible thread, a current that passes from one tone to another as if it were a melody. His brother Theo, upon receiving the letter where Vincent describes the painting, perceives that evolution. "I have tried to express the night," he writes, not as the eyes see it, but as the soul feels it. In that phrase lies his entire artistic revolution. Until then, the night had been for painters a technical challenge, a dark space to be illuminated. For Van Gogh, by contrast, the night is an emotion, a symbol of mystery and inner life. Its color is not the black of absence, but the blue of the infinite. In the starry night, the yellow of the stars seems to want to leap from the canvas. The blue of the sky moves like a river, and the black of the cypress rises with an almost spiritual force. Everything vibrates, everything breathes. It is color turned into pure language, into visible emotion. There is no rational discourse that can fully explain what it conveys. It is painting that is felt more than understood. And yet, behind that sensory explosion, there is thought as well. Van Gogh knew perfectly well what he was doing. He studied color theory, admired Delacroix's research on complementary contrast. He knew blue and yellow enhance each other, violet and orange converse, that the balance of composition depends as much on tone as on form. But he applied it from intuition, not from rule. In him, technique dissolved into emotion. The magic of his chromatic language lies in that, in his ability to unite science and feeling, calculation and passion. That is why his painting is still alive more than a century later, because it not only shows a landscape, but a state of the soul. Outside the studio, the sky of Saint-Rémy begins to darken. The colors that blazed over the fields during the day slowly go out, but inside the room they remain alight, trapped in the canvases. Van Gogh puts away the brushes, looks one last time at his work, and smiles wearily. He knows that color has its own language, and that tonight he has learned to listen to it a little better. The wind blows among the olive trees, and the shadow of the cypresses lengthens over the hill. Night returns, bringing with it that silence which, for Vincent, is not emptiness, but promise. A promise that very soon will become the purest expression of his spirit. There is a thin line that separates reason from the abyss, a border as invisible as it is fragile. Van Gogh walks it each day in Saint-Rémy, trying to find a balance that never lasts long. His days pass between luminous lucidity and shadows that return unannounced, like a storm breaking in the middle of summer. Sometimes he paints with an almost monastic serenity. Other times he shuts himself in his room, fearful of his own mind. But even in those moments, the need to create does not abandon him. For him, painting is much more than a craft. It is a way of staying alive. The crises arrive unpredictably. Sometimes they wake him in the middle of the night. He feels a vertigo, a noise that does not come from outside, an inner current that seizes his body. The carers find him agitated, murmuring incomprehensible phrases, sometimes in French, sometimes in Dutch. During those episodes, he loses track of time. Whole days dissolve in the fog of his mind. When calm returns, guilt overwhelms him. In one of his letters, he writes to Theo with a mixture of shame and lucidity. "During those hours, I am not myself. It is as if another force took my hand and my thought." Dr. Théophile Perron, the physician in charge of the asylum, observes him with interest and compassion. Unlike many doctors of his time, he does not treat him as an irrecoverable madman, but as a sensitive man trapped in his own whirlwind. He allows him to keep painting, convinced that art acts as a form of therapy. And he is right. When Van Gogh takes up his brushes again, the darkness recedes. Painting becomes a ritual of purification. In each stroke he seems to exorcise anguish, to transform pain into movement, despair into light. In those months, Van Gogh lives in constant oscillation. There are mornings when the Provençal air fills him with hope. He goes out to the garden, draws the flowers, breathes deeply. Other times, sadness paralyzes him. The landscape remains the same, but his eyes cannot see it. And yet, even in his dejection, Something in him pushes him on. "There is no night without stars," he writes, "and no sorrow without beauty." That phrase, born of his experience on the edge, sums up his way of resisting, turning the wound into color. During his periods of lucidity, he works with an intensity that astonishes the other patients. He paints the same subjects again and again: the garden, the olive trees, the wheat fields. In each repetition, there is a search for balance, a need to understand. Painting for him is not a distraction but a discipline. Each day at the easel is an attempt to order the inner chaos. And when the color begins to flow, the mind grows still. The movement of the brush synchronizes with his breathing, the sound of the wind with the friction of the bristles. The world recovers its rhythm. Often, on quiet afternoons, he sits in the cloister to watch the light. The sound of the water in the fountain, the song of the cicadas, the scent of lavender. Everything wraps him in an atmosphere of almost unreal peace. But even in those instants of calm, there is a shadow lying in wait. Van Gogh knows serenity will not last long. He lives on a tightrope, grateful for each day he can hold the brush without his mind betraying him. And yet, that awareness of fragility does not weaken him. On the contrary, it makes him more intense, more determined. In his art, there is an urgency that comes from knowing that the time of clarity is brief. The illness, painful as it was, also revealed something essential to him: that suffering could be transformed. Instead of denying it, he accepted it as part of the creative process. "My illness is my condition," he says in a letter. "I cannot separate it from what I paint." And perhaps he was right. That duality, that coexistence between torment and lucidity, is what gives his work its unmistakable strength. His canvases are not the fruit of delirium, but of the effort to find beauty within delirium. The carers at the asylum look at him with a mixture of respect and amazement. They know his behavior is unpredictable, but they also perceive in him a different sensitivity, a kind of intuitive wisdom. When he goes through one of his episodes, they isolate him for safety. When he comes to, he himself apologizes, asks for his brushes, and returns to work as if nothing had happened. He does not cling to pain. He does not wallow in his suffering. He channels it, transforms it. That ability to start over again and again, without resentment, is perhaps the greatest proof of his strength. There is something profoundly human in that silent struggle. Van Gogh does not see himself as a martyr, nor as a misunderstood genius. He considers himself a worker of color, a learner of life. In his letters, he speaks with humility, worries about the cost of paint, about the money Theo sends him, about the price of canvases. But among those everyday concerns slip phrases of disarming lucidity. Art is to console those who are broken by life. He paints to console himself, yes, but also to offer consolation to others. When one observes his paintings from this period, one feels that two opposing forces coexist in them. On the one hand, precision, control, considered composition. On the other, overflowing passion, movement, almost violent intensity. It is the reflection of his own unstable balance. Each work is a negotiation between calm and storm. In Wheatfield with cypresses, the sky churns while the earth remains firm. In irises, the harmony of color mingles with the tension of the lines. In the Starry Night, the entire cosmos turns above a sleeping town. Van Gogh sensed that his mind was not an enemy, but a tool he had to learn to understand. He knew that his sensitivity, the same that made him suffer, was also his source of vision. "Sometimes I think," he wrote, "that the illness gives me eyes to see what others do not." That assertion, far from arrogant, reveals a serene acceptance of his nature. He does not deny his fragility, but neither does he let it dominate him. In that acceptance lies his true lucidity. Perhaps, without intending it, Van Gogh embodies in Saint-Rémy one of the great truths of art, that beauty is not opposed to pain, but is born of it. Calm and madness, reason and emotion, clarity and shadow are part of the same fabric. His paintings are the testimony of that coexistence. When we contemplate them, we feel the same oscillation he lived, a peace that vibrates, a contained storm. On quiet nights, after a day's work, he sits on his bed and watches the moon's reflection on the floor. He does not write. He does not paint. He only looks. Perhaps in those instants he understands that the human mind is also a moving sky, with stars that turn, with clouds that dissolve, with spaces where silence becomes light. Art was his way of inhabiting that inner sky without getting lost. It did not cure him, but it sustained him. And while the rest of the world slept, he kept creating, transforming his suffering into shared beauty. Outside, night once again covers Saint-Rémy. The wind passes through the cypresses. The moon rises over the hills. In Van Gogh's room, the candle flickers beside the easel. The painter breathes deeply, takes up the brush, and prepares to keep painting. He does not know that those letters he writes to his brother will, someday, be the most sincere portrait of his soul. The silence of the asylum is broken only by the brush against the canvas. In that stillness, Vincent lets painting speak for him, say what his agitated mind cannot say. Because even on the darkest days, there will always be a letter to write, a word of comfort, a hand extended across time. And as the night advances, in the distance, the soft echo of the wind among the olive trees can be heard, reminding him that sometimes the soul finds its peace in the voice of those who love it, even when they are far away. In a corner of the Saint-Rémy asylum, as the afternoon dissolves into golden tones, Van Gogh sits down to write. On the table beside a half-spent candle rests a rough sheet of paper and a simple pen. The air smells of ink, linseed oil, and fresh paint. Outside, the cicadas intone their constant chant, and inside the room, the only sound is the faint scratch of the pen sliding over the paper. Thus begin the letters that Vincent addresses to his brother Theo, the only silent witness to his inner storm, his confidant, his accomplice, and, in a way, his other half. For almost 20 years, those two brothers maintained a correspondence that today allows us to enter the soul of one of the most complex and sensitive artists in history. More than 600 letters survive time, and in them confessions, artistic reflections, existential doubts, and fraternal tenderness intertwine. They are not simple messages. They are chapters of a life written by two voices, a conversation that spans years and cities, from the mines of Belgium to the fields of Provence. Theo was not only his brother, he was his support. He worked as an art dealer in Paris, and thanks to him, Vincent was able to devote himself to painting without starving. But the bond between them went far beyond money. There was between them a deep love, an unconditional understanding. Theo believed in Vincent's talent when no one else did, and Vincent, in turn, found in his brother's letters the only echo of hope capable of keeping him standing. Each letter from Van Gogh is a small work of art. He does not write with the intention of impressing, but of unburdening himself. In them, the most intimate emotion mingles with a surprising lucidity. He speaks of color, of light, of nature, but also of the human soul, of pain, of faith, of love. There are days when he is euphoric, excited by a new painting, or an idea that keeps him awake. On others, sadness invades him, and his words become dense, almost despairing. But even in his darkest moments, there is always in him a spark of beauty, a compassionate gaze upon the world. In a letter written from Saint-Rémy, he confides to Theo, "I feel a terrible need of religion. Then I go out and paint the stars." That phrase, so simple, contains one of the keys to his art. For Van Gogh, Painting is a form of prayer. When the soul finds no words, color becomes its language. Each stroke is a supplication addressed to the universe, a way of reconciling with life. The letters are also an emotional refuge. In them, Vincent can be completely sincere, without fear of judgment. He tells Theo of his fears, his relapses, his anxiety at feeling understood. "Sometimes I am afraid I am worth nothing," he writes. "But then I see the sun over the wheat, and I think there is still something to be done." That something to be done becomes his reason for living, his small daily faith. Theo always replies with tenderness, with patience, encouraging him without demanding anything. At a time when mental illness was a source of shame, Theo never treats him as a sick man, but as a human being who suffers and seeks meaning. His words are balm. He reminds him that he loves him, that his paintings have value, that he must keep painting even if no one buys them. "Your work is greater than you imagine," he tells him. "You only need to go on." Through those letters, one can feel the distance that separates them, but also the intimacy that unites them. It is a relationship that transcends time and space. Sometimes Vincent describes in detail the landscape around him, the irises, the sky, the wheat fields. At other times, he analyzes the paintings he has finished, explaining his decisions with almost scientific precision. He speaks of colors as one speaks of feelings. The blue that calms, the yellow that burns, the green that heals. Each description is a window into his mind. But beyond art, the letters reveal his deepest humanity. Vincent is not the misunderstood genius that history turned into myth, but a sensitive, vulnerable man full of doubts and tenderness. He is a brother who worries about Theo's health, about his wife, about the child who is about to be born. He sends him advice, drawings, words of encouragement. In one of his last letters, he writes, "Instead of despairing, I should learn to love the world more, even if it sometimes rejects me." It is the confession of a soul that, despite everything, does not renounce hope. There is something deeply moving in imagining him there, writing by candlelight, with paint-stained hands, while the rest of the asylum sleeps. Each word he traces on the paper is a form of communication with life. Although he feels alone, he knows that on the other side of those lines someone listens to him, understands him. And that certainty is enough to carry on. The letters are also a record of the birth of some of his most famous works. In them he describes how the starry night arises, how the idea pursues him, how the sky of Saint-Rémy calls to him again and again. He tells Theo of the colors he wants to use, of the emotion he wants to capture, of the sensation of infinity he wishes to convey. "I want to paint something that makes one feel the immensity of the sky," he writes, "but also the warmth of the earth. I do not want to copy what I see, but what I feel when I see it." That phrase, written without pretension, could be his artistic manifesto. Each line reveals his deep desire for connection. Although he lived in isolation, Van Gogh was not a loner. He painted to communicate, to build a bridge to others. And in Theo, he found the perfect interlocutor, someone who needed no explanations. Their relationship was a constant dialogue between reason and emotion, between the practical world of the dealer and the inner universe of the artist. Theo understood that behind each painting there was more than talent. There was an entire life seeking redemption. At times, the letters become almost prophetic. In one of the last he sends from Saint-Rémy, Vincent writes, "I think I will soon find rest, but I would like my paintings to go on speaking for me." There is in those words a disquieting serenity, as if he knew his time was shortening. But there is no rancor or despair, only gratitude. He thanks Theo for his support, for his love, for believing in him when no one else did. And with infinite humility, he adds, If my paintings ever are worth anything, it will be thanks to you. When we read those letters today, we feel the closeness of his voice, as if he spoke from the next room. They are not ancient texts, but living words that cross the centuries. In them, Van Gogh keeps breathing, keeps thinking, keeps seeking beauty amid chaos. They are his emotional testament, the written trace of his humanity. In the asylum, after writing, he puts away the pen, carefully folds the paper, and leaves it to dry. Then he leans out of the window. The sky of Saint-Rémy is clear again. The stars twinkle over the hills. Perhaps he thinks of Theo, of his brother in Paris, gazing at the same sky. And though they are far apart, the night unites them. Silence once again fills the room. In the air floats the smell of ink and of oil from the brushes. Tomorrow he will paint again. And his colors, somehow, will also be another letter, written not with words, but with light. Outside, the night wind brushes the cypresses and carries with it the echo of that eternal correspondence between two souls that never stopped speaking to each other, not even when the world became too big to understand them. The air of Provence smells of damp earth and ripe wheat. When the sun rises over the Alpilles, the asylum of Saint-Paul-de-Moselle awakens slowly. The shadows withdraw, and the golden fields begin to shine under a light that seems newly invented. For Vincent van Gogh, those sunrises are a form of rebirth. Each day that begins without a storm in his mind is a gift, a new opportunity to look at the world with wonder. And in that secluded corner of southern France, nature offers him a beauty so intense it borders on the spiritual. As the months pass, Saint-Rémy becomes more than his refuge. It turns into his companion, his silent interlocutor. Van Gogh finds in the landscape a kind of mirror where life and emotion merge. Each tree, each stone, each cloud moving over the hills seems to speak to him in a language only he understands. He does not need grand themes or human models. It is enough to go out into the garden, to watch the wind moving over the olive trees or the circular flight of a crow to feel that something profound is happening, something worthy of being painted. When the weather allows, he takes his easel and walks outside the asylum. The monks watch him from a distance, already accustomed to seeing that thin figure, straw hat tilted, advancing along the dirt paths. He carries his paint box, a stick, a few canvases. He stops often, not so much to rest as to look. He is a meticulous observer. He bends toward the flowers, follows the movement of the clouds with his eyes, studies the nuances of the sky, and each detail, each vibration of the air, he stores in memory. Saint-Rémy envelops him with its slow rhythm. The fields change with the seasons. In spring they are green and bright. In summer they turn golden and dry. Blue irises bloom near the cloister. Poppies dot the paths like little red flames. The mistral wind blows hard, and sometimes bends the olive trees until they almost break. But Vincent does not see fragility in that movement. He sees resistance. He sees life. Those twisted trees, with spiral trunks and silvery leaves, become for him a symbol of inner strength. He paints them again and again, under sun or moon, with the air in motion and the mountains as a backdrop. In one of his letters to Theo, he writes, "The olive trees are living beings, old and wise. When I paint them, I feel I converse with them." Those words reveal his almost mystical relationship with nature. He does not paint from a distance, but from communion. He does not seek to represent a landscape, but to participate in it. His brush does not describe, it breathes with the earth. At the asylum, painting becomes his form of meditation. While he works outdoors, the sounds of the countryside accompany him. The hum of insects, the song of the cicadas, the murmur of the wind. The palette fills with vivid colors, greens that seem to move, blues that shine under the sun, whites that breathe light. Each painting is a conversation between him and the landscape, an exchange of energy. That is why his Saint-Rémy canvases are not simple rural views. They are portraits of the soul of the place. One of the best known is Wheatfield with cypresses. In it, the sky turns in spirals and the clouds seem to move with the wind. The wheat undulates like a sea. The cypresses rise vertical, dark and elegant. There is movement everywhere, but no disorder. It is the harmony of natural chaos, captured by an eye unafraid of excess. Each thick stroke, each turn of the brush, is charged with emotion. In those compositions, the viewer can feel the heat of the air, the hum of insects, the energy of the sun on the skin. Another painting, Irises, reflects the other face of Saint-Rémy, calm. Van Gogh paints those flowers with an almost human tenderness. Each petal seems to breathe. The violet and white tones contrast with the intense green of the background, creating a sensation of serene stillness. In that work, there is no storm or agitation, only a luminous pause, an instant of peace. Through those landscapes, Van Gogh builds a kind of emotional map. Each painting is a mood, a visual response to the world around him. When he feels serene, his colors open. When melancholy touches him, the tones grow denser, more introspective. But in all there is a constant, vitality. Even on his darkest days, nature reminds him that life keeps beating, that the world breathes with him. He often writes to Theo to tell him what he sees. In a letter of 1889, he describes the landscape with words that seem brushstrokes. The fields here are a green almost silver, and the hills look bluish under the summer sky. The olive trees have golden reflections at sunset. Everything is so beautiful that I do not know if my painting can keep pace. In those lines one perceives his humility, his desire to be equal to the beauty around him. For him, nature is not something to be conquered, but something to be honored. The painting of Saint-Rémy has something of breathing, not only because of the movement of the brushstrokes, but because of the way it captures atmosphere. Van Gogh makes the air felt. His work is not made to be observed in silence, but to be lived. The viewer can almost hear the wind, smell the earth, feel the heat. That sensory capacity makes him a pioneer of what would later be known as emotional painting. An art that does not limit itself to showing, but seeks to make one feel. And yet, behind so much light, there is a story of solitude. Van Gogh paints surrounded by beauty, but without company. The peasants he sees in the distance do not recognize him. The monks watch him from afar. Only nature answers him. But that solitude is not bitter. It becomes a space of communion. In the silence of the countryside, he finds the companionship that men deny him. That is why, even though he is confined in an asylum, his painting breathes freedom. Saint-Rémy, with its changing landscape and moving sky, becomes his greatest teacher. It teaches him that harmony is not in stillness, but in constant flow. It teaches him that even twisted forms, like the olive trees, can be beautiful, and that the purest light arises after shadow. Each painting made, there is a lesson in balance, between emotion and observation, between chaos and calm. When evening falls, the sky turns orange and the hills turn violet. Vincent gathers his materials and returns slowly to the asylum. The air smells of resin and dust. He walks slowly, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has conversed with the world and has been heard. Sometimes, upon reaching the cloister, he stops a moment, looks at the sky, and smiles. He knows he will go out again tomorrow, that the landscape will change slightly, and that small change will be enough to begin anew. Night approaches, and with it silence returns. The cypresses cut their shadow against the firmament. Van Gogh watches them from his room's window. Those trees, which he has painted so many times, now seem to guard the secret of the sky. A sky that keeps calling him, as if it still had something more to show him. The sky of Saint-Rémy lights up slowly. There is no noise, no traffic, nor human voices. Only the monotonous song of the crickets and the murmur of the wind passing among the olive trees. The moon has begun to rise over the hills, and the darkness is tinged with a blue so deep it seems liquid. At his window, Van Gogh watches in silence. The night is different each time, but this one has something special. There is a vibration in the air, a clarity that does not fade, an invisible movement that runs through the sky as if the universe were breathing. The scene before his eyes belongs not to imagination, nor to dream, but to that poetic reality only he seems to perceive. The stars are not still. They turn, they throb, they expand. The wind, invisible, draws spirals in the dark. Everything seems to move to the rhythm of a cosmic heartbeat. In that apparent stillness, Van Gogh feels the night calling him, something within it wanting to be revealed. That call is irresistible, and will soon become one of the most recognizable and beloved works of all time. With his heart racing, he takes his notebook and begins to sketch by candlelight. The lines are quick, almost musical. He draws the profile of the Alpiles, the sleeping town, the cypress that rises like a black flame. Then he marks the stars, not as points, but as circles of light that seem to move. It is his way of representing the invisible, the pulse of the night, the energy that crosses the cosmos, and that he feels vibrating within himself. In those instants, the border between art and revelation dissolves. Van Gogh does not copy what he sees, but what he perceives beyond the eyes. The night becomes a mirror of his soul. The sky, in perpetual motion, reflects his restless mind, his thoughts that spin and swirl, his struggle between calm and storm. But this time, instead of resisting, he decides to surrender to that flow, to let emotion guide him. For several days he works without rest. Painting becomes an extension of his breathing. His brush movements are broad, decisive, almost choreographic. The spirals of the sky are formed with strokes that turn in a hypnotic rhythm. Each layer of blue is superimposed on another until it creates an almost infinite depth. At the center, the moon and stars burn a bright yellow, as if alive. The cypress ascends, dark, connecting earth with firmament, like a prayer that rises. Below, the town sleeps. The houses are small. The mountains fold like waves. Everything seems contained, calm, while the sky overflows. The painting advances as if it had a will of its own. Van Gogh writes to Theo telling him of the process. "This morning I saw the countryside from my window before sunrise. There was nothing less than the morning star, very big. Something moved me deeply. That phrase reveals the origin of the Starry Night. Not a fantasy, but an observation transfigured by emotion. What he paints is not the exact firmament he sees, but the firmament he feels. Reality and soul merge on the same canvas. As the painting takes shape, Van Gogh senses he is creating something different, something unlike anything he has done before. The sky is not a backdrop, it is the protagonist. Color becomes movement. Silence becomes sound. The viewer, upon contemplating it, cannot remain still. One feels that the painting breathes, that the air turns within it. In a way, the Starry Night does not represent a specific night, but all the nights of the world condensed into a single image. In his studio, the smell of oil and turpentine fills the air. The floor is strewn with bits of dried paint. The brushes rest in cloudy water. Van Gogh steps back from the canvas, watches it in silence, as if trying to listen to it. Lights and shadows vibrate. The cloth seems to have life. For the first time in a long while, he feels a strange peace, an inner quiet that does not come from fatigue, but from fullness. He has achieved something he had pursued for years, to express the ineffable. That night, when he finishes, he leans his back against the wall and looks out the window again. The real sky and the painted sky seem to blend. Outside, the stars keep turning, but now he has immobilized them in an eternal movement. He has trapped the vibration of the universe in a painting that breathes. He does not know if the world will understand what he has done. He does not paint it for success, nor for posterity. He paints it because he needs to, because his soul demands it. In the Starry Night there is no despair, as some have wanted to see later. There is a search for meaning, a reconciliation with mystery. It is the vision of a man who has known darkness, and who, even so, keeps looking toward the light. The stars, in his painting, are not symbols of distance, nor of loneliness, but of solace. They are presences. They are promises. Modern scholars have tried to analyze the work through science. Astronomers have identified constellations. Physicists have found in its spirals patterns of turbulence identical to those described by fluid dynamics. But beyond any technical interpretation, what truly moves in the painting is its emotional truth. Van Gogh, without formulas or telescopes, managed to paint the invisible movement of life. Sometimes, when the wind blows strong in Saint-Rémy and the leaves of the olive trees whirl, one can imagine him there, standing at his window, looking at the sky with eyes full of fire and calm. That moment, that silent dialogue between man and universe, was trapped forever on the canvas. And since then, the Starry Night has never stopped speaking to us. Because to look at that painting is to enter a state of stillness and vertigo at once. It is to feel time suspend and to understand for an instant something that cannot be explained. Each stroke reminds us that even amid chaos there is beauty, that life, like the sky, is made of unpredictable movements and lights that never cease to shine. Perhaps for that reason, when humanity contemplates the Starry Night, it does not only see a landscape, it sees itself. It sees its fragility, its desire for eternity, its need to find meaning in the vastness of the cosmos. And without knowing it, it dialogues with Van Gogh, with that man who, from the solitude of an asylum, managed to turn his pain into a door to the infinite. The sky of Saint-Rémy keeps turning, just as on that June night. But now, each time someone looks at the painting, that night is born again. A night that does not end, a night that keeps breathing through time, illuminating with its light the shadows of those who dare to look. Outside, dawn begins to appear, gilding the hills. Van Gogh closes his eyes, tired but serene. The sky still throbs behind his eyelids, and in the silence of the asylum, the universe seems to listen to his breathing. The morning breeze slips through the window, bringing with it the murmur of the fields and the echo of a life that, without knowing it, is leaving an indelible trace. The painting is finished. The air of the studio smells of oil, turpentine, and effort. Van Gogh observes it in silence, his eyes reddened from fatigue and a faint, barely perceptible smile. Before him, the Starry Night shines like a living organism. The canvas, still wet, reflects the candlelight. He does not know if he has achieved what he sought, not even if the result is good, according to the canons of art. He only feels a kind of relief, as if he had breathed after a long immersion. The night has been painted. The unsayable now has form, texture, and color. But outside the asylum walls, the world keeps turning without knowing that something extraordinary has just been born. In his time, The Starry Night did not arouse admiration. No one spoke of it. No critic mentioned it. No dealer showed interest. Theo, his brother, received it with affection, but also with caution. He wrote to him gently, recognizing the intensity of the painting, though regretting that it might be too imaginative for the public's taste. Vincent understood. He knew that his painting, with its spirals and its vibrant colors, was too far from what society of his time considered art. Paris still preferred the elegant scenes of the salons and the polished portraits of the bourgeois. No one was prepared for that moving sky. In the months that followed, life in Saint-Rémy continued in silence. Van Gogh kept painting, but his canvases remained stacked against the wall. No one bought them. No one exhibited them. The letters to Theo grew ever briefer, more tired. He began to feel that he had given all he had, that his voice would not be heard. "I have worked with all my heart," he writes, "but I do not know if my paintings will find their place in the world." Behind those words lies weariness, but not rancor. Van Gogh never sought fame. He sought meaning. The public's indifference weighs more than any criticism. His brother tries to encourage him, assuring him that recognition will come with time. But Vincent, ever more lucid and more fragile, begins to accept that perhaps his destiny is to be misunderstood. And paradoxically, that acceptance gives him a new calm. He keeps painting, keeps looking at the sky, keeps finding beauty in the ephemeral. For him, art is not a career, but a vital necessity, a way of being in the world. History, however, will see to repairing that silence. Decades after his death, the very paintings that no one wanted to hang in his time will become universal symbols. The brushstrokes once considered clumsy will be seen as bold, the colors that seemed excessive as revelatory. Van Gogh will be recognized not only as a painter, but as one of the purest and deepest consciences of modern art. But none of that could he know. In life, he barely sold a single work, and when recognition came, he already belonged to another sky. In his last months in Saint-Rémy, his mental health fluctuates between calm and crisis. At times he feels he is improving, at others that he is falling again. The asylum fills with murmurs. Patients walk in circles, monks pray. The wind resounds among the walls. Van Gogh, silent, observes that small, almost still world. He writes to Theo tenderly, concerned for his work and his family. He speaks more of his brother than of himself. There are no longer complaints, only gratitude. "If I ever run out of strength," he says to him, "I want you to know that I tried with all my heart." Outside, Provence keeps blazing with light. The fields change. The irises wither. The wheat turns golden. Vincent contemplates them for the last time before leaving the asylum. After a year in Saint-Rémy, he requests discharge. He believes he needs a change, a new horizon. He thanks Dr. Perron for his patience and carefully stores the paintings he has made. There are more than 150, an immense harvest for a soul that sought peace. In May 1890, he moves to Auvers-sur-Oise, a small town near Paris where Dr. Gachet lives, a friend of the Impressionists and also an amateur painter. There he hopes to find tranquility, a gentler rhythm of life. The nature is similar to that of Saint-Rémy: wide fields, immense skies, humble houses. But something has changed in him. Although he continues working intensely, a shadow accompanies him. The weariness has grown deeper, the weight of silence harder to bear. Yet in those last months he still creates some of his most beautiful works: Wheatfield with Crows, the church at Auvers, portrait of Dr. Gachet. In all of them, one perceives a contained force, an emotion that beats beneath the surface. His colors turn darker, but his gaze does not lose luminosity. It is as if he knew he was painting his farewell to the world, but wished to do it with gratitude. Recognition still does not arrive. Dealers continue to ignore him. The public, when it mentions him, considers him an eccentric. And yet, in silence, something begins to take shape. The young artists who know him, few but attentive, feel that there is in his painting a different truth. They do not imitate him, but they sense him as a precursor. What for his time is madness, for the future will be intuition. Van Gogh does not live to see that transformation. On July 27, 1890, only 2 months after his arrival in Auvers, he goes out to the fields to paint with his easel. No one knows exactly what happened that afternoon, but he returns wounded. 2 days later, he dies in the room of the inn where he was staying. Theo is at his side. His last words, they say, were, "The sadness will last forever." But perhaps what he meant is that sadness is an inseparable part of life, like the color of shadow in a painting of light. The silence that surrounded him in life will, with the years, become a clamor. His paintings will travel the world. His letters will be published. His name will become a symbol. The Starry Night, that painting that no one wanted to look at, will be reproduced millions of times, reinterpreted, studied, loved. But most importantly, it will continue to fulfill its original purpose, to console. Because when one contemplates it, one sees not only a night sky, one sees the persistence of beauty even amid pain. The paradox is that the man who lived without recognition will, in time, be the most recognized of all. His life, marked by silence, will generate centuries of conversation. His sleepless nights will become inspiration for those who seek meaning in the dark. And each star painted will go on shining, not only over Saint-Rémy, but in the collective memory of humanity. The wind blows once more among the cypresses, as then. In the museum where his work is exhibited today, people stop before the Starry Night without saying a word. Some smile, others close their eyes, others simply breathe. And in that silent instant, the spirit of Van Gogh is present again, not as the tormented artist history invented, but as the man who knew how to transform suffering into light. And while the painting keeps shining under the gaze of those who contemplate it, out there in the real world, the night continues to spread its mantle over the fields, as if wishing to remind us that the sky keeps moving, that life, despite everything, keeps beating. There are paintings one looks at with the eyes, and others one listens to with the soul. The Starry Night belongs to the latter. It is not just a painting. It is a conversation between man and the universe, a question thrown at the sky that, more than a century later, still awaits an answer. Before it, the centuries stop. The spirals of light turn with the same hypnotic slowness as the passing of the constellations, and the viewer feels, perhaps without understanding why, that something inside begins to move as well. Van Gogh did not paint that night as a scientist observing the cosmos, nor as a mystic seeking supernatural revelations. He did it as a human being trying to understand his place in the world. And in that attempt, he achieved something few artists reach, uniting the personal and the universal, pain and hope, the fragility of life with the greatness of the infinite. Each star in the painting seems like a kindled thought, a fragment of consciousness burning above the darkness. The message conveyed by the Starry Night is not easy to summarize. It is not an allegory nor a manifesto, but pure emotion, a vibration that cuts through words. It is, in essence, a look at existence. At the center of its composition is movement, the idea that nothing remains still, not even the sky. The stars turn, the moon breathes, the air undulates, and even the sleeping town seems to throb beneath that living cosmos. It is a painting that suggests that life, even in its apparent stillness, is in constant transformation. That vision is not born of naive optimism, but of a deep understanding of pain. Van Gogh knew darkness from within, but instead of surrendering to it, he decided to illuminate it. In his letters he wrote that he wanted to paint the comfort that the stars bring to those who cannot sleep. That phrase contains his entire philosophy. Art as a bridge between anguish and hope. In his universe, the night is not the end, but a space of revelation. When one contemplates the painting, one perceives that the sky imposes itself upon the earth, but without crushing it. The town, with its sloping roofs and solitary steeple, rests beneath immensity, and yet it does not disappear. Humanity is there, small but resilient. Van Gogh seems to tell us that human life, though fragile, is part of the same fabric as the stars. The infinitely large and the infinitely small touch in his painting. There are those who have wished to see in the Starry Night a religious message. They are not wrong. The painting has something of prayer, of ecstasy, but it is not a traditional faith. Van Gogh does not paint the sky as a domain of gods, but as a shared space where the divine and the human coexist. The spirals of light are not miracles, they are pulses of energy, expressions of the same movement that animates trees, clouds, and souls. The cosmos, in his vision, is a living organism, a breathing totality. Others have read the work through science, finding in its eddies an astonishing anticipation of turbulence theories. And it is true, the forms he painted resemble the patterns that physicists would discover much later in the behavior of fluids and galaxies. But what is truly astonishing is that that intuition was born without telescopes or formulas, only from observation and sensitivity. Van Gogh, without intending it, captured a universal truth, that the movement of the sky and that of the soul obey similar laws. In a way, the Starry Night is a representation of the human mind contemplating the infinite. There is order, but also chaos. There is beauty, but also vertigo. The viewer who pauses before it feels simultaneously calm and agitation, as if the painting invited surrender to mystery without needing to understand it fully. It is a reminder that there are things that can only be felt, not explained. Beyond its scientific or symbolic reading, the painting carries an emotional message that transcends cultures and generations. In it, there is an invitation to look, but also to listen. To listen to the silence of the night, the heartbeats, the murmur of a world that turns without rest. In an age when life runs too fast, stopping before the Starry Night is like learning to breathe again. It is a reminder that we are still part of a larger cosmos, and that, though the noise of the day confuses us, the stars remain there, faithful, constant, a light. The painting also contains a lesson about time. What Van Gogh painted in a dawn of 1889 remains alive more than a century later, and not because it is in a museum, but because its message does not age. Each generation looks at it and finds in it something different. Some see hope, others melancholy, others the promise that beauty can arise even out of madness. That ability to be reborn in each gaze makes the work a universal mirror. Perhaps the secret of its permanence lies in its humility. It does not seek to impose a truth, but to share an experience. Van Gogh does not paint to teach. He paints to accompany. And that gesture of empathy, so silent and so powerful, is what makes his art remain necessary. In each stroke there is an outstretched hand, a voice that whispers, "Look, the world can be beautiful like this too, even when it hurts." The message of the stars, then, is not a supernatural revelation, but an invitation to tenderness. It reminds us that the universe is not an indifferent stage, but a presence that converses with us if we learn to look. It teaches us that even in the deepest solitude there is a possible connection, that the sky is not above, but around, within, beating in each gesture, in each breath. And perhaps that is Van Gogh's deepest legacy. having shown that art is not made only to be admired, but to accompany life. His Starry Night does not seek answers, it offers company. It is a pictorial embrace, a promise that darkness can contain its own light. Today, when someone stops before the painting, whether at MoMA in New York or on a phone screen, they experience something that transcends time and language. For an instant, we all share the same gaze, the same question, the same wonder. Van Gogh's stars keep speaking to us, not because they are different, but because we still need them. Outside the museum, night once again stretches over the modern city. Artificial lights have stolen the sky, but it is enough to look attentively to discover that the stars are still there, hidden behind the glow. Van Gogh's message remains valid. Even in the midst of darkness, there is always something that shines. And as the gaze is lost on the horizon, one can imagine that solitary man of Saint-Rémy, standing at his window, contemplating the same sky we contemplate today, letting immensity embrace and console him. The wind blows again among the olive trees, and the stars, those very stars he painted, continue turning with the calm of the eternal, as if they still kept one last story to tell. The train advances slowly among golden fields. Outside, the French landscape stretches in a mosaic of wheat fields and dusty roads. It is May 1890, and Vincent van Gogh travels north toward a small town called Auvers-sur-Oise, not far from Paris. He has left behind the asylum of Saint-Rémy with its guarded calm and stone walls, and now seeks something different, a place where the sky is wide, where the air will bring him back to life. On the seat beside him, a small leather suitcase holds some brushes, paint tubes, letters, and a worn hat. He is accompanied by the faint hope of a new beginning. Upon arriving in Auvers, the world opens. The slate-roofed houses rest by the river. The fields vibrate under the sun, and the sound of the bells mixes with the murmur of the leaves. Vincent feels he can breathe again. He is received by Dr. Paul Gachet, a man of melancholic countenance who, besides being a physician, is a painter and art lover. At Theo's urging, he has agreed to care for him. He has the soul of an artist, Gachet will later say, but also the fragility of a crystal that has been struck many times. In Auvers, Van Gogh's life fills with light. He sets his easel before the fields and paints without rest. The villagers have grown accustomed to seeing his tall, thin figure advancing along the paths, always with his tilted hat and a palette hung on his arm. They watch him with a mixture of curiosity and respect, without fully understanding the intensity of his gaze. For Vincent, each day is a race against time. He paints with urgency, as if he sensed that the inner clock was running out. During those months, his creative rhythm reaches an astonishing point. He produces more than 70 paintings in barely 10 weeks. The canvases pile up in the room he rents at the Refuge Inn. Landscapes, portraits, houses, gardens. Everything he touches becomes color and movement. His brushstrokes are faster, surer. There is no hesitation, only need. The nature of Auvers seems to respond to his impulse. The wind stirs the wheat fields. The clouds move across the horizon. The crows cross the sky like black notes on a golden score. Among the works of those days stand out Wheatfield with Crows and the Church at Auvers, two pieces that summarize his state of mind. In the former, the horizon is divided between the gold of the wheat and the turbulent blue of the sky. The paths cross, but none leads to a clear destination. The crows, dark figures, fly in opposing directions. There is no explicit drama, but there is a deep tension, a sense of farewell. In the church, the forms are slightly deformed, as if matter were dissolving into light. Architecture, which ought to be stable, seems to move, to vibrate. It is a church without shadows, without established faith, open to uncertainty. In the letters of that period, his tone oscillates between serenity and exhaustion. He writes to Theo that he feels better, that the air of Auvers suits him, that Dr. Gachet is a kind and understanding man. But he also confesses a growing concern. He fears being a burden to his brother, whose health is failing and whose responsibilities increase with the birth of his son. "Sometimes I think I am good for nothing but painting," he writes, "and that is not enough to sustain life." His words are sweet and bitter at once, full of gratitude but also of resignation. The evenings in Auvers have a serene beauty. The sun hides slowly, bathing the wheat fields in a light that seems to come from another world. Van Gogh sits on a hill and watches how the color changes as the day dies. At his side, his paint box rests open. He does not need to speak. His dialogue is with the earth, with the sky, with that invisible force that drives him to create. There is a peace in his gaze, but also a distance. The same distance that separates one who lives fully from one who is beginning to say goodbye. On July 27, 1890, the town wakes under a clear sky. Van Gogh goes out early as usual. He takes his easel, some canvases, and goes out into the fields. No one knows exactly what happens afterward. Some witnesses see him walk toward the outskirts. Others say they heard a shot at sunset. What is certain is that he returns wounded at nightfall, walking slowly, his hands stained with blood. He does not ask for help, he does not complain. He only murmurs, "I have tried to kill myself." The innkeeper calls the doctor, but the wounds are serious. For 2 days, Theo travels urgently from Paris to be at his side. When he arrives, Vincent is still conscious. They speak little. There are no grand speeches nor melodramatic farewells. Only looks, gestures, silences. Theo holds his hand, and Vincent, in a weak voice, says to him, "The sadness will last forever." But he also adds, almost in a whisper, "I have loved people so much. Too much, perhaps." Those words sum up his entire life. A love without measure, a sensitivity that overwhelmed him, a soul that never stopped seeking beauty even in pain. He dies on July 29th, at 37 years of age. The sky over Auvers, that afternoon, is covered with violet clouds. Theo organizes the burial the next day. The coffin, covered with yellow flowers, his beloved sunflowers, rests beneath a tree on the hill from which Vincent used to paint. Friends place his paintings around, as if they were open windows to his gaze. No one imagines, at that moment, that that modest funeral will mark the beginning of one of the most enduring legends in art history. Theo, devastated, lives only a few months more. He dies in January 1891, consumed by illness and sorrow. The brothers, inseparable in life, will be so in death as well. Decades later, their remains will be buried side by side in the same cemetery of Auvers. There they remain, under the very earth he painted so much, surrounded by the wheat fields that still ripple with the wind. To look today at his last works is to peer over a border. In them there is melancholy, yes, but also a kind of transcendent clarity. It is as if, in his final days, Van Gogh had understood something essential, that life, though brief and painful, is also an act of beauty. Each brushstroke is an affirmation of existence, a gesture of resistance against oblivion. Time will see to returning to him the voice his era did not wish to hear. But beyond recognition and homage, what remains is the feeling that his painting is still alive, that his gaze remains among us, inviting us to see the world with the same mixture of wonder and compassion. And as the wind moves through the wheat fields of Auvers, one can still imagine him there, walking with his easel on his shoulder, seeking the exact place where sky and earth touch. Perhaps he knew he would not return, but he wished to say goodbye by painting. And in that farewell, he left one last lesson, that even at the end there is light. The sun sets over the golden fields, tinting the air with a warm glow. The shadow of the cypresses lengthens, and the sky lights up again with the first stars. Night descends once more, like a silent veil that covers everything and promises, without words, that what shines does not disappear. It only changes form. Time has passed, but the sky remains the same. The stars still turn over the fields of Saint-Rémy, and the wind that stirred the olive trees keeps blowing with the same cadence. In the place where Van Gogh looked at the nights from his window, the air preserves something of his breath. The asylum of Saint-Paul-de-Moselle still stands, with its pale stone walls, its flowering garden, and its ancient silence. Visitors who arrive there walk slowly, as if fearing to interrupt something sacred. Reproductions of his paintings hang on the walls, and the hills in the distance seem not to have aged. If one closes one's eyes, one can still imagine him there, bent over his easel, seeking with his gaze a way to say what the heart could not pronounce. More than a century has passed since he left this world, and yet his presence has not gone. It dwells in museums, in books, in the voices of those who pronounce his name with respect and tenderness. But above all, it dwells in us, in every person who stops before the Starry Night and feels that the painting speaks in a language that needs no translation. Because what Van Gogh painted was not only a landscape, but a universal experience, that of looking at the sky and feeling small, yet also part of something immense. Each time someone pauses before that canvas, time is suspended. The whirls of light keep turning. The moon goes on shining. The cypress continues rising like a black flame. And yet, what the viewer sees is not a fixed scene, but a perpetual movement. It is as if the painting breathed with each gaze, as if it changed slightly depending on the soul that contemplates it. Perhaps that is why it never ages, because its substance is made of emotion, not pigment. In the halls of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where it is preserved today, the murmur of the public falls silent before its presence. There are those who observe it in silence, others who approach with discreet tears. No one leaves that experience the same. Some feel consolation, others nostalgia, others a calm they did not know they needed. The Starry Night does not demand understanding. It offers company. It is a silent refuge for those who have felt darkness and, even so, have kept seeking the light. What surprises when contemplating it up close is its vitality. The brushstrokes are thick, tactile, almost sculptural. Each stroke contains the energy of a human gesture, the trace of a breath. There is no distance between the artist and the matter. What was pain, doubt, or hope became movement and color. And therein lies its miracle. Van Gogh managed to transform instability into beauty, uncertainty into harmony. He did not eliminate suffering. He made it understandable. In his painting, fragility becomes strength, and solitude, a form of communion. With the passing of years, his figure has become a symbol, that of the misunderstood artist, the tormented genius, the martyr of art. But reducing him to that would be unfair. Van Gogh was much more than his tragedy. He was a man who loved the world deeply, who found beauty in the everyday, who wanted to understand life through color. His legacy is not pain, but the way he transformed it. His paintings are not cries of despair, but love letters to existence. In one of his last letters he wrote, "I feel calm in knowing that my work remains. What matters is to sow that word, sow, defines his destiny better than any other. He did not seek to reap glory or fame, but to sow light. And he succeeded. Each of his works is a seed that keeps germinating in those who look at it, awakening something that slept deep within. To look at the Starry Night today is an experience that transcends art. It is a reminder of what it means to be alive, to feel, to doubt, to seek, to love. It is a bridge between the ephemeral and the eternal. Each brushstroke seems to say that life, with all its uncertainty, is worth living. That even in chaos there is order, even in sadness there is beauty, even in darkness there are stars. And perhaps that is what moves us most. Its capacity to speak to us, not from reason, but from emotion. Van Gogh did not wish to explain the universe to us. He wished to share how he felt it. And that gesture, so human, so intimate, made him eternal. Because art, when it is born of inner truth, ceases to belong to its time. It becomes an extension of humanity. Sometimes, when night falls, one can imagine that the stars of his painting continue turning in the same real sky. That Saint-Rémy, Auvers, Paris, and any corner of the world are connected by that same light. On a planet where millions of people have looked at the starry night, that invisible connection creates a silent community. Those who, when looking up, feel the same as he felt. And one need not be a painter to understand it. It is enough to pause an instant, turn off the noise of the world, and lift one's eyes. The sky, that immense stage that inspired Van Gogh, is still there. The stars continue their dance, the winds blow, the clouds move. The universe keeps speaking to us in its language of light, waiting for someone to listen. Perhaps that is why, each time someone contemplates a clear night without realizing it, they pay homage to that man who found in darkness his source of clarity. Van Gogh does not belong to the past. He belongs to the present, to each gaze that seeks meaning in immensity. His art is not preserved only in museums, but in the human capacity for wonder. The silence that accompanies his paintings is not emptiness, but fullness. It is the necessary pause to hear the breathing of the world. It is the reminder that, though everything changes, the centuries, the cities, the people, beauty remains, like an invisible thread that unites the living with those who are no longer here. The night of Saint-Rémy was only the beginning. Since then, the sky has continued to inspire poets, musicians, dreamers, scientists. But in each attempt to look at the infinite, there is something of Van Gogh, a spark of his gaze, because he taught us that art does not consist in seeing, but in truly looking. Now the wind passes again among the olive trees, the shadows lengthen over the earth, and the firmament fills with points of light. The same stars he painted light up again, one by one, over the night. And while the world turns, the message of his painting persists, serene, unalterable. That beauty is not in what lasts, but in what touches the soul. Perhaps that is why, when the day ends and the sky darkens, we still feel the impulse to look up. And in that simple gesture, in that silent pause, Van Gogh remains alive. Not in museums, nor in books, but in the emotion he awakens in those who dare to contemplate the world with wonder, as if it were the first time. Night once again unfolds its mantle. The stars turn, the air breathes, and the universe continues its dance. And we, from some corner of the world, keep looking, remembering, understanding. Because after all, the sky is still there. We have traveled together through the night of Saint-Rémy, following in the footsteps of a man who knew how to look at the sky and find in it his own voice. Perhaps, upon closing your eyes, you can still see those same stars turning above you, reminding you that beauty is always near, even in the dark. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey. Good night.